Hello, Massachusetts Conference for Women. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm Miranda Wicker, the social media director for the Conferences for Women, and I'm here today with Sean Bacchus, talent acquisition manager for Sanofi. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Sean.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do at Sanofi.
Yeah, so thank you. So I am the talent acquisitions manager for Sanofi North America. I manage positions typically at a director level or above within the organization for North America. I've been within the organization now a little over 3 years, based out of Bridgewater, New Jersey, and it's a little bit about me.
All right. So we're going to talk a lot today about interviewing, but specifically about interviewing virtually, because we've got a lot of people right now who, it's sort of the way of the world. It's like a new frontier for interviewing. So many jobs are remote these days. And I've worked remote for about 8 years now, ever since my daughter was born. So I'm well versed in interviewing virtually, but there are always tips, no matter how much you think you know. So we're going to focus in just a little bit about that today. So what's different about interviewing virtually? What should applicants expect when they're going into an interview right now?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Obviously it's a little bit different in terms of the dynamics when you're doing a virtual interview. I will also say the pillars always remain the same, right? Preparation, research on the organization, really doing kind of your due diligence, right? But I always go back to some of the foundational things, and that's making sure you obviously have good internet connection, that you're testing that in advance of the meetings, right? Number one, that you're picking a place that there's really good lighting as well. I think it's understandable that, when you're going through these types of assessments, you're seeing some of the personal situations as well in terms of background, home, etc. That's understandable, right? Understanding that these are virtual type meetings, but from a foundational perspective, some of those pillars I mentioned really remain the same: preparation, due diligence, doing your homework on the organization, really kind of understanding where some of those connection points are for you, as you look at that prospective opportunity, and really prepare yourself to really have some really good dialogue.
And maybe only pajamas from the waist down.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so.
Definitely, take a few minutes like you would in a real interview. Okay,
Exactly.
so you mentioned a little bit that, in a virtual interview, you're looking into the interviewer's home, or the interviewer is then looking into your home, so the applicant's home environment. Are you like looking at an applicant's bookshelf? I mean, I know I built mine specifically because number one, I love my books, but number two, I wanted something that was nice behind me when I was doing, camera events. But are you looking at their bookshelf? Are you evaluating their professionalism in the same way that you would in an in-person interview?
It's a good question. So I don't know from an evaluation standpoint if I'm going that route, but I think it's human tendency. You're looking at the person's background, much like if they're going through an on-site interview, first impressions are always very important, as we know. So I would say, again, just going back to some of those preparation points, making sure that, again, you're picking an environment that's comfortable, maybe staying away from a bedroom that has, obviously a bed in terms of the background setting, making sure it's a spot that you feel is comfortable to really have some really good positive dialogue, right? But, to your point, are we looking at the background? I think it's just humanistic, I guess, right? But I think it's also important that the interviewer is picking a place that they feel that they're comfortable to really, again, have some really good dialogue. I would also say for individuals in terms of preparation, it's really good to, if they're interviewing with Sanofi, to check out our en.jobs.sanofi.com/interview preparation website. Gives some really good background in terms of doing some due diligence in regards to research, getting yourself prepared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You want to come into it. We've talked a lot. I've done a lot of these for the various conferences, and the one thing that we keep coming back to that is consistent across the board with every hiring manager or recruiter that I've spoken with is you have to do your diligence about the business that you're interviewing with. You have to know what they're looking for. Are they a good fit? Are they a good culture fit? Is this this going to be a place where both of you can be happy? That's been the one thing, is just to make sure you've done your diligence, that you've done your homework. And I think it's great that Sanofi has a website that basically does the diligence for you. So there's no creeping around on the internet hoping that you find the right information. You guys have sort of laid it out. So we'll be sure to link that website somewhere related to this video so that people can find it. So what suggestions do you have, for connecting authentically in a virtual interview? It's different when you can't feel the body language, you can't feel the energy of the person who's in the room with you. So how do you bring that same energy to a virtual interview?
So again, great question. Yeah, I think it goes back to being your authentic you, right? At the end of the day, if it's a virtual interview or a face-to-face meeting, you're still trying to make a connection with that individual, right? So I think the first few minutes is very important, as you go through in terms of explaining your background, the due diligence that you've done, the connection points you see, right? And, let me also say, it's also very important that you're assessing the individual that you're meeting with as well, right? Because you want to get a good take. Is this the right fit for me? From a cultural perspective, an organizational perspective, is this the right role for me, right? But also extension of that, does this organization hold the values that I'm looking for, within a company, right? So I think authentically, obviously technology has changed the way that we do things. I think there's some benefits to that. Nothing really beats a face-to-face meeting, let's be frank, right? Where you can kind of read body language. But I think with the technologies that we have, the due diligence that you do from your side, you're able to make that connection. But I think the most important thing is you've got to be yourself, right? And you've got to go in there with a listing of questions based on your preparation that you've done, organization, role, culture, ERGs, career journey. Really, how does this organization kind of align to some of my major objectives that I'm looking for, not only just a position, but a career? I would say the preparation remains the same, on-site versus virtual. But again, making that connection, making sure that you're making good eye contact, right? Good visual cues. The one thing I will say is, when we go through interviews, and I typically do assessments, anywhere between 15 to 20 assessments on a weekly basis, it's really important that you stick to the STAR method: situation, task, actions, and results when responding to questions. Now, obviously, you don't want to sound programmed, right? But you want to think about that in terms of holding the interviewer's really attention, right? And kind of body language as well. You've got to read that. Am I hitting the notes? Should I be asking a question? Hey, does that address the question that you've asked, right? Do you have a full picture of what the intent of the question is, right? So really kind of reading that body language, very, very critical.
Well, you've brought up this point a couple of times, so I'm going to skip around in the questions that we sort of prepared for this. So you've brought up a couple of times now, coming to the table with questions. And so that is always a thing that's always sort of struck me, as that gotcha moment in an interview where, I mean, it's not supposed to be, but personally, it always feels that way. There's a moment in every interview where the interviewer says, "Do you have any questions for me?" So how can a candidate make the most of that time? Obviously, I think one of the answers that you're bringing up here is to come with questions, for sure, that you definitely want to make sure you ask. But in the interview, so this is a two-part question. What questions should I bring to the table? Should we bring to the table when we're coming to an interview? And the second is, when you have those questions in the moment, is it better to ask them when you have them, or hold them until that portion?
Yeah, it's another great question. So I would say, in terms of the due diligence that you're doing, right, making sure, I guess, foundational questions as I'm going through assessment, if I'm on the other side, is, position, how does the position align to my skills, right? I think there's some natural organic questions that you can kind of breathe out of that. Culturally, right? Great question that I always like is, how would you define the organizational culture, and maybe how has it evolved, during your time here at Sanofi, right? Another great question. I think career-wise as well, right? What should I expect in terms of the organization from, equipping me for career mobility, opportunities? How do you guys lean into that, right? I think it's also very important. I think those are really three foundational questions that really should be, equipped for anyone going through an interview. Great point in terms of your second question. How do you insert that during the interview process? I think you look for opportunities, and I think any assessment that you're going through, there's going to be space either towards the middle or the end where the interviewer will say, hey, we've had an opportunity to go through some good dialogue. What questions do you have for me? And it's not unusual when you're going through a remote-based assessment to look down and make it very clear at the beginning that you're going to be taking some notes, right? So as we go through some dialogue, I might be kind of heads down as I'm taking some notes, right? But that's just natural as you're going through more of a remote setting.
I have notepads all over my desk, so I'm always scribbling notes on something not necessarily here because we've gone through our questions a little bit, but in any other, I'm always scribbling notes. My kids are like, how do you find anything? It's just, you have to be
Same
taking
here.
notes. You have to write it down. I have to write it down or I'll forget. I'll forget by the time you ask me what I want to, what questions do I have? So then, this is the other thing that I think some people get stuck on when they're in an interview, and it's related to questions because it's the one question that interviewers ask that I think sometimes people don't know how to respond to, and that question is, "Tell me about yourself." So it's a very open-ended question, and there's so many things that we could say as fully actualized, well-rounded individuals. But what's a recruiter really looking for when we ask that question, or when they're asking that question? Tell me about yourself.
Very general question. I would agree. I think the suggested path is you want to let the assessor into, what makes you, right? So what are your drivers? What are your interests, professional interests, right? What are your goals, right? It's okay to keep it casual. I think we're looking for some genuinity in terms of the responses, right? I think we're looking for genuine responses. What makes you, right? Keep it professional. Point to things that interest you, perhaps maybe some hobbies as well, right? And you can really tell from the tone of the assessment really what the intent of the question is, right? If you want it to be a little bit more personal or perhaps keep it professional, that's an individual choice, but it lets the assessor into, what makes you, what makes you unique, and what are your drivers.
So it sounds like maybe preparing the answer to that question is to find a balance of, who you are as a person, but what you can bring to the table for that position.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I gotta, we should all narrow down maybe our favorite book if you can choose. I can't, but maybe you start with an icebreaker. My favorite book is, I don't know. That's going to be a question that stumps me for the rest of my life, I think. So what's one thing you wish every job seeker knew about the hiring process? Just to demystify, here's what the hiring process is like for a recruiter, and here's what we wish you knew.
It's not just about the skills, right? A lot of candidates just assume we're assessing against just skill set fit. Is person X, do they equate to the full core responsibilities of the role? That's only one aspect. And I would say, smaller aspect. We look at cultural fit. How does the person lean into our organizational values, our play to win philosophies, which is a major pillar here in Sanofi, team fit, right? Organizational fit. What are the goals for the individual? How does that align from an organizational capacity, right? So I'll use a quick example. If I have a financial analyst professional that I'm assessing, and they says, hey, I want to be a CFO in 2 years, I know that's not going to match up, right? So I want to probe a little bit about why, right? It's all those things that make up the candidate, organizational fit, cultural fit, team fit. How does this person kind of fit into our career pathing, philosophies as well? There's a whole gamut of things, and a lot of them, relate to soft skills. It's not just does the person meet all the requirements for the role. It's those larger aspects that I just mentioned.
So I'm going to go off book here just a little bit, because this is I think a great question that you just brought up. Would you say that you've seen in your history, in your tenure in talent acquisitions, would you say that you've seen a shift from finding the candidate who is the most by the book for the role into something that is more who's by the book for the role and who is also a culture fit? Would you say that's been like an evolution of the nature of hiring over the course of your career?
I would say so, absolutely, because as I look back at my career, the decision was typically with the hiring manager solely, right? Hiring managers focus, can the person do the job? That's what I'm focused in on, right? Now you've got so many things that are involved. You've got the recruitment team that is more at the table now as a key decision maker, natural evolution. We involve cross-functional business partners into the assessment process as well. As I look back at my career, even 10 years ago, it was a decision where the candidate just met directly with an HR representative, and they met with the hiring manager, and decision was made. We've got so many decision makers that are assessing the candidates at multiple angles to make sure that we're selecting the right candidate for the role. And it's always interesting as we go through the debriefing process, again, focus on angle. When we're hearing that download during the debriefing process, it's always very interesting for me to see, how how the feedback is, right? Because there's so many different nuances that go into it. It's definitely evolved, and I think it's for the better, because again, we're not just hiring on skill set. We've made decisions before where we've hired someone that maybe is more of a potential candidate hire for us, where we're hiring on potential, not exactly in terms of exact skill sets that they meet, right? So there's those multitude of things that we look at. And so it's definitely evolved.
Well, personally, I mean, I think that evolution has been a positive one. I come from an education background, and you can hire someone who can teach the math, but can they teach the students? Just because you can do the math doesn't mean you can teach the math. It doesn't mean you can teach the kids. And so, I think there's a power in finding the person who fits cross-functional teams, like you said, and not just can you plug and play and do the role. So I mean, I think it's been a positive change for hiring over the last, certainly my professional career. Okay, last question, and then I'm going to let you get back to your day. But how can a candidate leave a lasting impression on you when they're interviewing remotely?
Good question. So I always think about what we call closing the conversation, right? Really important for the candidate, again, to use that time to make sure that we're addressing all of their questions, but also to ask the question, hey, do you have everything you need to really make an informed decision on my candidacy, right? I always love that question because it's a nice kind of bow to the interview. But I also liked when candidates take the next step in terms of sending a follow-up email, right? Kind of summarizing the conversation, right? As I think about kind of old school techniques, right? That still is a foundational thing where it says, hey, the candidate took this time to really kind of reinforce, what are the key drivers for them? Where do they see the connection points, right? To me, that leaves a lasting impression, and it's a nice little bow, if you will, in terms of the assessment process.
Yeah, so maybe an email is just as good as that handwritten card that I was taught to send so long ago.
Yes, me
So
too.
thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I was like handwritten card. I was like, well, I don't know where to mail this. Where do I mail this card? I've written it, but I don't know where to send it now. But an email is, much simpler, much faster, although slightly less personal, but still a great touch. So
Exactly.
thank you so much for being with us today, Sean. We appreciate you so much, and we appreciate Sanofi and the work that you're doing. So
My
thank you for
pleasure.
your support of the conference and of the enjoy your time. Enjoy your time here.
Yeah. Looking forward.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
there's going to be a lot of great stuff. So be sure you click around and check it all out.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.